My sister said, "The best wedding gift would be you disappearing from this family forever." My parents agreed, so I sold the hangar home and pulled the plug on the wedding money. What I left in the empty house shocked them. Hey Reddit! Every other Sunday, my parents host dinner at their hangar home in a gated fly-in community outside Austin. Private runway, HOA that acts like a small government. The kind of place where grown men treat a Cessna like a personality. Dad's a retired county public works lifer. Mom used to run a daycare until my sister hit middle school, and suddenly parenting became a single-player game. That player was never me. I'm Cade, 33 male, aircraft maintenance compliance manager for a major cargo carrier out of San Antonio. My entire job is documentation, audits, and making sure nobody cuts corners on aircraft that carry 40 tons of freight at 500 miles per hour. I took Mom's maiden name at 18 because I wanted something that was mine. Remember that instinct. It comes back later. That Sunday, I'd driven up after a brutal week, FAA audit prep, 2 write-ups on a 767, and a conference call with corporate legal that lasted 4 hours. I walked in, grabbed a Dr. Pepper from the fridge, and sat down at the table where Lennox was already holding court. My sister works brand partnerships at a marketing agency in Austin, which means she gets paid to make things look better than they are. She's terrifyingly good at it. Could reframe any situation, so she's the hero and you're the problem, and she'd do it with a smile that made you feel crazy for noticing. Her fiancé Kellen sat next to her, junior loan officer at a regional bank, had his pilot's license for about 8 months and talked about the aviation world like he'd landed on a carrier deck instead of a grass strip in a rental. Nice enough guy on the surface. Zero depth underneath. I mentioned I'd just been tapped to lead the compliance team for our carrier's new regional hub expansion. 12 aircraft, new maintenance facility, full regulatory approval process. It was the biggest thing I'd worked on in my career. Dad grunted. Mom said, "That's nice, honey," in the same tone you'd use if someone told you they found a quarter in the couch. Lennox set her fork down. "You know what would make my wedding absolutely perfect?" She looked right at me. Not angry, not heated, calm, rehearsed. "If you just disappeared from this family, forever, that's the only gift I want from you, Cade." I waited for the correction. The Lennox, that's enough. The uncomfortable laugh, something. Dad reached for his glass of sweet tea. Mom kept cutting her brisket. Neither looked up. Neither said a word. "I'm dead serious," Lennox continued. "You make everything weird. You show up, talk about work nobody cares about, suck the energy out of every room, and then act confused when nobody's impressed. Just go, please." "Lennox," I started. Mom's hand came up. "Your sister is getting married, Cade. Could you not make this about you? Just once?" I wasn't making it about me. I'd said 12 words about work before Lennox detonated. "Always the job," Dad muttered. "Never family, never what matters." I looked at the 3 of them. Mom had already turned back to Lennox. Dad was studying his plate. Kellen was examining his fingernails, like they contained state secrets. I stood up. Didn't raise my voice, didn't slam anything. "Appreciate the clarity," I said. Took my jacket off the back of the chair, walked to the front door, and left. Nobody followed, nobody called out. The screen door closed behind me, and the conversation inside resumed before I reached my truck. Through the window, I could see Lennox already pulling up something on her phone, Mom leaning over her shoulder, both of them lit by the warm kitchen light like I'd already been edited out. The drive back to San Antonio took 53 minutes. I merged onto the highway with both hands on the wheel, and my brain went quiet. Not anger. Anger is reactive. This was something older. I knew what it was. The last piece of evidence had just landed on a pile that had been growing for decades. I spent those 53 minutes running calculations, not emotional calculations, actual numbers. Because here's the thing Lennox didn't know, and my parents had apparently forgotten. When I turned 21, Dad added both me and Lennox to the deed on the hangar home. Tenants in common, each owning 25%. Dad explained it as estate planning. Smart move for inheritance. Real dumb move when one of your kids decides to cash out. The property, a 2,800 square foot hangar home with attached T-hangar, direct taxiway access, and a lot on the Airpark's premium row, had been appraised 18 months ago for insurance purposes at $785,000. My 25% was worth $196,250. They wanted me gone. Fine. But gone has a price tag. I gave myself 2 weeks before making any move. Not to calm down, to build a case file. Deed records from the county clerk. Property tax history. The HOA covenant package. All 63 pages of it, including the transfer review process that kicked in whenever ownership changed hands. I pulled up Lennox's social media too. Not to stalk, to catalog. She'd been posting wedding details for months. Venue was a converted barn estate outside Dripping Springs, capacity for 220 guests. She'd posted the deposit receipt, $8,500 non-refundable, like it was a flex. Total wedding budget looked like $52,000, mostly funded by mom and dad's savings. The same savings that would need to cover buying out my share of the property if they wanted to keep the house. Then I met a real estate litigation attorney out of Austin. Found him through a colleague whose ex-wife had tried to block a property sale during their divorce. He was mid-50s, had a voice like gravel, and decorated his office with framed photos of his dogs instead of diplomas. I liked him immediately. He confirmed what I already suspected. As a co-owner, I could petition for a partition sale under Texas Property Code, Chapter 23. If they couldn't buy me out at fair market value, the court orders a sale. Not fast, 4 to 6 months minimum, but legally bulletproof. The HOA transfer process would add friction, not a barrier. I retained him that afternoon. I also went to 2 family events in that window. Not because I wanted to, because people who are comfortable mistreating you will keep doing it on camera if they don't think anyone's watching the tape. The first was a wedding planning brunch at mom and dad's. Lennox had invited 6 of her friends, plus Kellen's mother. I showed up with a gas station coffee because I knew there'd be nothing there for me. I was right. She'd set the table for exactly the number of guests -1. No chair, no place setting. She grabbed a folding chair from the garage, wedged it at the corner where it half-blocked the kitchen doorway. I sat there for 90 minutes while she walked everyone through the wedding timeline, the seating chart, I wasn't on it, and the bridal party rolls. I wasn't in the bridal party, wasn't even listed as family seating. She'd put me at a table in the back with Kellen's college roommates. Nobody commented. Mom beamed through the whole thing like her daughter had just cured cancer. The second event was worse. Dad hosted a Saturday cookout for Air Park neighbors. Burgers, brisket, the works. The HOA board president was there. So were maybe 15 other residents. Standard Air Park culture. Everyone's an expert, everyone has opinions, and the runway is the only thing they actually agree matters. Lennox used the opportunity to corner me near the hangar while Dad was flipping patties and entertaining the board president with a story about a drainage culvert project from 1997 that nobody asked to hear. I need you to transfer your share of the house to me and Kellen, she said, keeping her voice low enough that nearby conversations covered it. Dad said he'd talk to you about it, but since he hasn't, I'm asking directly. Transfer it? For what? For the family. Kellen and I are going to move in eventually. We need the ownership clean. Clean meaning my name off the deed. It's not like you use the hangar. You don't even fly. I own 25% of a property worth close to $800,000, Lennox. You're asking me to hand over 200 grand because it's convenient for your timeline. Her eyes went flat. That was the real Lennox. The one behind the Instagram filters and the brunch invitations. Cold, calculating. Used to getting what she wanted because she knew exactly who to push and how hard. You're being difficult, she said. As usual. I'm being accurate. As usual. She walked away. 30 minutes later, Mom pulled me aside near the runway fence and told me I was creating tension and that I should think about what's best for the family. I told her I was thinking about exactly that and left. That night, I emailed my attorney, green light, draft the buyout offer. Let's start the clock. The clock started. They just didn't hear it ticking yet. Lennox threw her engagement party at the Air Park's community pavilion, a covered structure near the runway threshold that residents could reserve for events. She'd gotten an event permit, roped in a caterer, strung up Edison lights, and hired a photographer. Every angle was a photo op. Every moment was a potential Instagram story. About 80 people showed up. Air Park residents, friends from Austin, Kellen's bank colleagues, extended family. A King Air taxied past during the speeches, which Lennox handled by pausing dramatically and saying, "Even the planes are celebrating," which got a laugh from everyone except the pilot. One of Dad's brothers drove down from Dallas, the kind of guy who'd never called me once, but had strong opinions about everything I did. I came in khakis and a button-down. Understated. I wasn't there to perform. I was there to close a chapter. The photographer arranged a family shot near the pavilion's stone wall. Mom and Dad center, Lennox and Kellen to their right, me on the far left, half out of frame. The photographer actually asked me to scoot in, and Lennox said, "He's fine where he is." Click. Last family photo. They didn't know it yet. After the photo, I found Lennox near the dessert table, laughing with 2 friends about some influencer partnership she'd landed. "Got a minute?" I said. She excused herself with an eye roll. We walked toward the edge of the pavilion, away from the crowd. The runway stretched out behind us, empty in the evening light. "I've been thinking about what you said at dinner," I told her. "About disappearing." I watched her face change. Interested, almost hopeful. You were right. I'm going to do exactly that. Good, she said. Honestly, Cade, it's better for everyone. You've always been, but I'm taking what's mine on the way out. That hope died fast. What does that mean? You'll find out this week. I walked back to the party, stayed another 40 minutes, shook Kellen's hand, said goodnight to the HOA president, who was complaining about someone's unapproved hanger paint job. Last time I'd ever shake that man's hand. Last time I'd ever say goodnight to any of them. Monday morning, my attorney sent the certified letter to my parents' address. Return receipt requested. Formal buyout offer, $196,250 for my 25% share. 60-day response window. If they couldn't or wouldn't buy me out, I'd file for partition under Texas Property Code, Chapter 23. The letter arrived Wednesday. I know because the return receipt came back with Dad's signature, written so hard the pen almost tore through the card. Dad called 14 times between Wednesday evening and Thursday morning. I let everyone go to voicemail. The messages escalated from confused to angry to threatening. The last one was just heavy breathing and "you've lost your mind, son." Mom texted, "This is cruel and you know it. Call me." Lennox went nuclear within hours. She created a group chat called Family Crisis with every relative, family friend, and air park neighbor she had a number for. Her version, Cade is trying to force the sale of our parents' home out of jealousy over my wedding. He's always been resentful. He's trying to destroy our family because he can't stand not being the center of attention. She backed it up with screenshots. Cropped, of course. A text where I'd written, "I'm done trying to explain my legal rights to people who don't care," got trimmed to just, "I'm done," and "people who don't care," made it look dismissive rather than exhausted. Another where I'd told Dad, "The offer is fair and you know it," got cropped to "you know it." 3 words that, stripped of context, sounded threatening. She didn't need to lie. She just needed scissors. Then came the social quarantine. She started telling people, not loudly, just quietly in side conversation, that she was genuinely worried about Cade's stability, and that for everyone's safety, it was better not to engage with, not an accusation, a concern. The kind of thing that makes people cut you off and feel good about it. 3 neighbors who'd been friendly with me for years stopped returning texts within a week. She left out, naturally, the part where she asked me to permanently disappear from the family. She left out the decades of being treated like a line item nobody budgeted for. She left out the folding chair at the brunch and the seating chart that put me with strangers at her wedding. Dad's brother called 9 times in one day. I answered the 9th because I was curious what a man who hadn't spoken to me since 2019 had to say about my life decisions. "You're tearing this family apart," he said, voice thick with righteous anger. "When's my birthday?" Silence. "It's March 14th. You've never once called. Not on that day, not on any day. You're not calling because you care about me. You're calling because Lennox told you to. We're done here." I hung up. One of my aunts sent me a 4-paragraph email calling me the most selfish person to carry our family name. This from a woman who once refused to lend Mom her KitchenAid mixer for Thanksgiving because she didn't trust other people's outlets. One of my cousins texted me a Bible verse about honoring thy father and mother. I texted back Colossians 3:21. "Fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged." He left me on red. The funniest part was the sudden surge of interest in my existence. These people had my number all along. Nobody used it for birthdays, holidays, or anything that actually mattered. But threaten a house sale and suddenly everyone's a family counselor. Funny how that works. Nobody's number one until they're the one with leverage. The air park drama was a separate front. Lennox convinced 2 board members that I was unstable and might do something reckless with the property. Classic concern trolling. The HOA president called me directly. "I've received some communications from your sister regarding the property on Taxiway Charlie. I want to make sure we're all on the same page about community standards. I'm exercising a legal right as a co-owner. My attorney has filed proper notice. If the board has specific concerns about the transfer process, they can put them in writing and send them to my lawyer." That shut it down. The president was a retired airline captain who respected chain of command communication. He didn't want legal heat, but Lennox wasn't done. She filed a complaint with the HOA alleging I'd violated the property maintenance covenant by failing to contribute to upkeep costs. Complete nonsense, since property taxes and HOA dues were paid through a shared account Dad managed, and my 25% had been auto-drafted from my bank for years. I had every receipt, 12 years of them. My attorney sent the HOA a 4-page response with documentation attached. Complaint dismissed in a week. Then the board tried something creative. The president sent a notice of a proposed special assessment for runway resurfacing, $4,200 per property, due within 60 days. My attorney requested the HOA's financial records under Texas Property Code 209 and found the runway fund was already fully funded. He sent a letter pointing out that a targeted assessment without a membership-wide vote violated the HOA's bylaws, and that selective enforcement against properties under court-ordered sale constituted interference. The assessment disappeared from the next agenda without explanation. Then came the gate access issue. Lennox somehow convinced the Air Park security company to deactivate my gate code, claiming I was no longer a resident. I drove up one Saturday to check on the property, my legal right as a co-owner, and the gate wouldn't open. Had to call my attorney from the car. He called the HOA management company. My access was restored within 2 hours, along with a formal warning to whoever had authorized the deactivation. Meanwhile, the 60-day buyout window was ticking. Dad's attorney, a general practice guy from Round Rock, who mostly handled wills and fender benders, sent my lawyer a letter arguing the buyout price was inflated and that I should accept $120,000 in the interest of family harmony. My attorney's response was 3 sentences. The appraisal was conducted by a licensed independent appraiser. The offer stands at fair market value. If your clients cannot meet the buyout, we will file for partition. 2 weeks of silence. I used the time productively, filed every document my lawyer needed, built a timeline of ownership contributions going back to when my name was added to the deed. The kind of meticulous, boring work that wins court cases. Day 58, Dad called my attorney directly. Tell him we'll pay. We just need more time. 6 months. My lawyer relayed it. I thought about it for exactly 1 evening. No extension, I told him. They've had the deed for 12 years. They had 60 days notice. File the petition. The petition for partition sale was filed on a Tuesday in Travis County District Court. Filing fee, service costs, billable hours, it was adding up. But the math still worked. Even after legal fees, commissions, and closing costs, my cut would clear $170,000 minimum. Combined with my savings, that was a new start. The court assigned a commissioner to evaluate whether the property could be physically divided. You can't split a hangar home in half, and scheduled a hearing for 8 weeks out. Lennox's wedding was in 5 months. The hearing got pushed back 3 weeks. Commissioner had a scheduling conflict, then the court docket was packed and bumped us twice. Dad's attorney filed a motion to delay, arguing undue hardship. The judge gave them 2 extra weeks to present financial alternatives. They presented nothing. Just a letter from Dad saying the house had sentimental value and that selling it would destroy the family. The judge ordered the sale. I exhaled for the first time in weeks. The system worked. The documentation held. Now came the hard part. Actually getting the thing sold with Lennox, doing everything short of setting it on fire. My attorney recommended a realtor who specialized in air park properties across Central Texas. She'd sold 11 hangar homes in 3 years and understood the HOA transfer process inside out. Lennox tried to torpedo the listing from day one. First, she called the realtor directly, claiming I didn't have authority to list the property. The realtor asked for the court order. I provided it. Done. Then, Lennox posted in the Air Park's residents' Facebook group, a move that backfired spectacularly. She framed the sale as a hostile act by a disgruntled family member and asked neighbors to discourage outside buyers. 2 residents screenshot the post and sent it to the realtor, who forwarded it to my attorney, who added it to our file as evidence of interference with a court-ordered sale. The HOA president called an emergency board meeting to address community concerns about the listing. I attended. Lennox was there. Mom was there. Dad refused to come. The boardroom was a converted office in the Air Park's main hangar building. Fluorescent lights, folding tables, stale coffee. 8 board members sat behind a long table, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. About 20 residents in the gallery, some genuinely concerned, most just there for the drama. This one had attracted a crowd. The president opened with a statement about property rights and community standards. Then he turned to Lennox. You've raised concerns about this sale. Can you specify what covenant violations you're alleging? Lennox had prepared. She stood up with a folder, printed emails, screenshots of text between her and me, selectively edited, a character reference from her agency boss describing her as a stabilizing presence in her family, and framing the sale as retaliatory conduct, professional letterhead, pure spin. I let her finish. Then I stood up, opened my own folder, and placed 4 documents on the table. Deed copy showing my legal ownership, court order mandating the sale, 12 years of HOA dues payment receipts from my bank account, and the HOA's own covenant, section 14.3, which states, no board action shall impede or delay a court-ordered property transfer. I'm not asking the board's permission, I said. I'm informing the board that this sale is proceeding under court order. If anyone interferes, they're obstructing a judicial mandate. My attorney is available to discuss that further. The president looked at Lennox, looked at me, looked at the court order. The board has no grounds to intervene, he said. The transfer review process will proceed normally once a buyer is identified. Next agenda item. He started to move on like it was settled. Lennox couldn't stand that. You can't just... This isn't about covenants. He's not family. He's an inconvenience we tolerated. And now he's leveraging a piece of paper to... The room went dead quiet. A guy in the back stopped chewing. 20 people just watched her say the things she was supposed to keep inside. The president stared at her. 2 board members exchanged a look. A woman in the third row put her hand over her mouth. Lennox heard it. Heard the silence. Her mouth closed. She sat down without another word. I didn't react. Didn't need to. She just said out loud what my whole family had been doing quietly for 19. And she said it in front of witnesses. Every tool in her kit. And she blew it with her own mouth. The realtor listed the property the following Monday. Professional photos, aerial drone shots of the runway access, 3D virtual tour. She priced it at $779,000 because air park buyers negotiate like it's sport, and she wanted urgency without looking desperate. Before the first showing, the realtor needed me on site to walk the property for photos. I pulled up to the gatehouse and the guard, new kid, maybe 22, told me he'd been instructed not to let me through. Wouldn't say by whom. I didn't raise my voice. I parked in the visitor lot, called the HOA property manager, then my attorney, then sat in my truck and waited. 45 minutes. The guard kept glancing over like he expected a scene. I was reading an airworthiness directive on my phone. My lawyer's call resolved it. The guard waved me through, looking relieved. I nodded at him on the way past. No hard feelings. He was just the tool someone else picked up. The first showing was that Thursday. Lennox showed up uninvited, parked her car across the driveway, and told the prospective buyer, a retired airline captain from Houston, that the house had foundation issues and the HOA was under investigation. The realtor documented everything and called my attorney. He filed for a temporary restraining order and injunction blocking Lennox from contacting buyers or interfering with showings, granted within a week. Lennox framed it to her group chat as Cade got a restraining order against his own sister, which technically wasn't wrong but left out the part where she'd been committing tortious interference with a court-ordered sale. Context is for people who want the truth. Lennox just wanted a story she could spin. Second showing went smooth. Third one almost didn't. The buyer was a married couple. He loved the property. She was ready to write a check. Then the wife got a DM on Instagram from an account she didn't recognize. Lennox had found her through the showing schedule and sent a message about how the property was the center of an active family dispute and that purchasing it would make them complicit in displacing elderly parents. The wife panicked. Called the realtor at 9 p.m. The realtor spent 40 minutes walking her through the court order. The couple stayed in, but it was close. My attorney added the screenshots to the interference file. The realtor told me later that if they'd backed out, the court could have ordered another listing cycle and dragged this into Lennox's wedding month. By the end of the month, we had 2 offers, one at asking price, one at $760,000. The realtor recommended the full price offer, a couple relocating from Colorado. He was an aerospace engineer. She ran a remote consulting business. They had a Cirrus SR-22 and wanted taxiway access. They passed the HOA transfer review in 19 days. Clean background. Paid the $2,500 fee without complaint. No objections from residents. Closing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. Then the title company found an old mechanic's lien from a contractor who'd done hangar door work 8 years ago. Dad had paid the guy in cash and never got a lien release filed. Nobody's fault, just boring paperwork friction. Took 11 days to track down the contractor, get a signed release, and record it with the county. 11 days of Lennox probably hoping the whole thing would collapse on a technicality. Closing happened on a Thursday afternoon in late October at a title company in Austin. Separate signing at my attorney's office that morning. No need to see my parents. The title company handled coordination. After fees, commissions, and the mortgage payoff on what Dad still owed, net proceeds came out to approximately $168,000 per share. Less than the raw quarter, because of Dad's mortgage balance and closing costs. Still life-changing money for me? Devastating math for them. Here's what the numbers did to Lennox's wedding. The $52,000 budget was funded primarily from Mom and Dad's savings. Those savings were now needed to secure housing. They ended up renting a 3-bedroom outside Pflugerville. No runway, no hangar, no air park address. The deposits Lennox had already put down, venue, caterer, florist, photographer, were mostly non-refundable. She scrambled to cancel what she could and lost about $11,000 in deposits total. The dream wedding evaporated. 200 guests became 50. The converted barn estate became Kellen's parents' backyard. The designer dress became something off a rack at a bridal outlet. I learned most of this through the realtor, who heard it through the Air Park grapevine. I didn't go looking for updates. They just arrived. 2 days after closing, I drove to the hangar home one last time. The new owners weren't moving in until the following week. The house was empty, cleaned out, echoing. I walked through every room like I was doing a final walkthrough before signing off. Kitchen, where I'd been ignored. Living room, where family photos featured Lennox prominently, and me as background noise. The hangar bay where Kellen parked a rental plane twice, acting like he owned the place. On the kitchen counter, I placed a black 3-ring binder, heavy duty, the kind you'd use for an FAA audit file. Lennox ran on optics. I ran on receipts. The front cover had a single label, printed clean. Exit invoice, prepared by Cade. First page was formatted like an FAA non-compliance finding because I'm petty in a professional way. Finding, requested permanent removal of family member. Root cause, explicit directive from Lennox, enabled by both parents. Corrective action, exit plan executed, assets liquidated per court order. Status, closed. Behind it were 6 tabbed sections, deed and appraisal records, the buyout offer they refused, and the lowball counter I rejected. Court filings, including the TRO, the full HOA interference log with every timestamp, and a tab I called The Receipts. 23 entries spanning 19 years. Each one dated, each one factual. No editorializing. Just a ledger of every time I'd been sidelined, excluded, or erased. Documented the same way I'd document a recurring maintenance deficiency on a 767. Last page was 3 centered lines under the words, "You asked for this." Cause, "The greatest gift is if you disappear from our family forever." Effect, partition sale, $779,000 property liquidated, wedding budget eliminated. Status, gift delivered. Beside the binder, I placed an envelope containing a handwritten letter. Edited down the way I edit audit reports. Cut everything that isn't load-bearing. You told me to disappear. I did. You refused the buyout, so the house sold. You funded a wedding instead of honoring a legal obligation, so the wedding collapsed. Every consequence in this binder goes back to a decision you made, not me. Don't look for me. Don't call. Don't send relatives. This is what forever looks like. Cade. I closed the front door, dropped my key into the lockbox the realtor had left for the new owners, and walked to my truck. The sun was going down over the runway. A Cessna 150 was doing touch and goes on 17. Somebody's kid was riding a bike along the taxiway edge. Normal Air Park evening. Normal life going on while a family blew apart, and nobody outside these gates would ever know. Didn't look back. Didn't need to. I drove south toward San Antonio. I'd already submitted my transfer request to the carrier's compliance office in Raleigh, North Carolina, weeks earlier. Timed so the approval came through right around closing. Different state, different life. Raleigh was flat and green and didn't remind me of anything. I rented a place near the airport, 15-minute commute. Started work the second week of November. New team, new facility, new aircraft fleet to audit. Nobody knew my family. Nobody asked why I'd transferred. The kind of fresh start that doesn't feel dramatic. Just quiet. Just mine. I changed my phone number, closed old email accounts, deactivated every social media profile, updated my mailing address to a P.O. box. If anyone tried to track me from San Antonio to Raleigh, they'd hit a wall. That was the point. The work kept me busy through the holidays. Thanksgiving was takeout Thai food and a football game. Christmas was a long run and a steak I cooked myself. New Year's was nothing. I don't mean that sadly. I mean I did nothing, and it was exactly what I needed. January brought information I didn't ask for. A former Air Park neighbor, a guy I'd been friendly with, emailed my work address, the only contact he still had. The binder had been found by the new owners during their move-in walkthrough. They'd called the realtor, thinking it was leftover closing paperwork. "There's a binder on the counter," the wife had said. "Looks like it belongs to the previous family." The realtor called my parents. Dad drove over and picked it up. According to my former neighbor, Dad sat in his truck in the new owner's driveway for 45 minutes before driving away. Just sat there. Engine running. Reading, presumably. Or trying to figure out how a kid he'd treated like background noise for 19 years had built a 60-page case file documenting exactly how invisible they'd made him. Lennox married Kellen in mid-December. Backyard ceremony at his parents' house in Cedar Park. About 50 people. The reception was potluck. Lennox posted a single photo with the caption, "Not what we planned, but grateful for everyone who showed up when it mattered." Nobody mentioned me. I'd been erased from the narrative completely, which was exactly what she'd asked for. Mom and Dad were renting in Pflugerville. No runway, no hangar, No air park address. Dad's truck sat in a regular driveway next to a regular mailbox on a regular street. For a man who'd spent 20 years as the guy on Taxiway Charlie, the loss of that identity hit harder than the money. Lennox, per my former neighbor, was not doing great. The wedding she dreamed about for years had been downgraded to a potluck. The hangar home she'd planned to eventually inherit was owned by strangers. Her social media had gone quiet. Kellen's loan officer's salary wasn't enough to maintain the lifestyle she'd built her brand around. I didn't feel satisfaction reading that email. Didn't feel guilt either. Just nothing. The kind of nothing you feel when you finally stop checking a bank account that never had anything in it. I emailed him back. Appreciate the update. I'm good out here. Take care. And I meant it. Every word. February, March, April. I settled into Raleigh's rhythm. Joined a running group at Umstead State Park on Saturdays. Got pulled into a side project auditing maintenance records for a fleet acquisition. My supervisor, a former Navy mechanic, told me my documentation standards were annoyingly thorough, and then promoted me to lead the new fleet's compliance integration. Spring turned warm early in North Carolina. Azaleas everywhere. I was at work on a Monday in April when my office phone rang. Front desk. There's a woman here asking. Says she's family. My chest tightened for 1 second. Then it passed. Tell her I'm unavailable. Let security know I'm not expecting visitors. She left after 20 minutes. I didn't ask what she looked like, but Lennox had tracked me to Raleigh, probably through my carrier's website, which listed office location, and she wasn't the type to accept a closed door. She wanted an audience. She always wanted an audience. The opportunity came 3 weeks later, and it came because of my former neighbor. He'd mentioned in a follow-up email that the air park was hosting its annual spring fly-in, aircraft displays, vendor booth, pancake breakfast, community barbecue, open to current and former residents. I hadn't planned to go, but my carrier needed someone to attend an EAA regional safety seminar being held that same weekend at a field outside San Marcos. I volunteered. Professional reason, legitimate travel. And when I was done Saturday afternoon, I drove the 40 minutes to the air park, not for the fly-in, because my former neighbor had offered to give me a box of tools I'd left in his garage 2 years ago. I pulled through the gate. My old code had long been deactivated, but he cleared me as a guest. Parked near the community pavilion. Same Edison lights from Lennox's engagement party, now strung between vendor booths. Same stone wall. The fly-in was winding down, maybe 60 people still milling around. A few experimentals and a restored stagger wing sat on the ramp, wings glinting in the late afternoon sun. The HOA president holding court near the pancake station, talking to someone about transponder regulations with the intensity of a man who truly believed this was the most important conversation happening anywhere on Earth. I found my former neighbor at his hangar, grabbed the tools, and was loading them into my truck when I heard her voice behind me. Are you kidding me right now? Lennox. Standing on the taxiway in a sundress and designer sunglasses, pushed up on her head, arms crossed, jaw set. Kellen was 10 feet behind her, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else on Earth. I closed the tailgate, turned around, said nothing. You have the nerve to show up here? Her voice carried. A few heads turned near the pavilion. She wanted that. After what you did to this family? After you ruined my wedding? I leaned against the truck bed. Let her go. That binder was psychotic, Cade. Keeping a list of every time you felt slighted? You need help. Seriously. A few more people had drifted closer. The HOA president set his plate down. You done? I asked. No, I'm not done. You owe mom and dad an apology. You owe me an apology. You took everything from us because you couldn't handle not being the favorite. I pushed off the truck. Stood straight. Didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. Lennox, you asked me to disappear forever. Those were your exact words. Mom and dad sat there and agreed. I did what you asked. The house sold because you refused a fair buyout. The wedding collapsed because mom and dad chose to fund your party instead of honoring a legal obligation. Every single thing that happened to you goes back to a choice you made. She opened her mouth. I kept going. I'm not apologizing. I'm not coming back. I'm not arguing about this in a parking lot at a fly-in. You got what you wanted. So did I. I walked to the driver's side of my truck. You're going to die alone, she called after me. Not a threat, a wish. The kind of thing people say when they've got nothing left and they know it. I opened the door, looked back at her one last time. At Kellen, hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched, looking like a guy who realized way too late what he married into. At the hangar home down taxiway, Charlie that now had a different family's name on the mailbox. At the HOA president, watching silently from the pavilion, plate of pancakes going cold. Maybe, I said. But you already practiced disappearing me. You're just mad it worked. I got in the truck, started the engine, and pulled out through the gate. Didn't look in the rearview mirror. The gate closed behind me with a clank that sounded exactly like what it was, a lock sliding into place. Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true. My stepdad told me to get off his property during a BBQ because I disagreed with his politics. My house, my rules. I reminded him that the house is in my name and he pays zero rent. He laughed and said I wouldn't dare. I served him a 30-day eviction notice with dessert. Hey Reddit. So my stepdad told me to leave his property during a family BBQ because I had the audacity to disagree with his political opinions. He puffed up his chest like some kind of suburban warlord and hit me with the classic "my house, my rules." One small problem. The house is literally in my name. He pays zero rent, zero utilities, zero property taxes, and apparently zero attention to legal documents. When I reminded him of this minor detail, he laughed in my face and said I wouldn't dare do anything about it. So I served him a 30-day eviction notice right there with the apple pie. He stopped laughing real quick. Let me give you guys some background, because this story requires context to fully appreciate. I'm Jason, 32 male, and I've been dealing with my stepdad Doug, 58 male, for about 15 years now. He married my mom when I was 17, right after my biological father passed away from a heart attack. My dad was a quiet, hardworking man who spent 25 years as a senior accountant at a regional firm. He wasn't flashy, didn't drive expensive cars or wear designer clothes, but he was smart with money, really smart. The kind of guy who maxed out his retirement contributions, invested in index funds, and paid off the house by the time he was 45. When Dad died, he left everything to me and my mom. The house was paid off, there was life insurance, some investments, and a small inheritance from my grandparents that he'd never touched. Mom was devastated. They'd been married since college, and suddenly she was alone at 42 with a teenage son and no idea how to manage finances, because Dad had always handled everything. Enter Doug. He swooped in about 8 months after the funeral. They'd met at some grief support group, which should have been my first red flag. Not that grief support is bad, but Doug was there for his second wife who'd passed away 3 years earlier. 3 years. Dude was still attending meetings long after most people had moved on. In hindsight, I think he was trolling for vulnerable widows. Doug was the opposite of my father in every way. Loud where Dad was quiet. Flashy where Dad was practical. Opinionated where Dad was thoughtful. He drove a lifted truck he couldn't really afford, wore clothes with visible logos, and had strong opinions about everything from sports to politics to how other people should live their lives. The man had never met a topic he didn't think he was an expert on. My mom, still grieving and lonely, fell for his confident act. Within 6 months, they were engaged. Within a year, they were married. I was 18 by then and about to start college, so I figured whatever. She's an adult, her life, her choice. I didn't like Doug, but I didn't have to live with him full-time anymore. Here's where things get interesting from a legal standpoint. Before my dad died, he'd set up the house in a specific way. The property was held in a trust, with me as the primary beneficiary. Mom had lifetime residency rights, meaning she could live there as long as she wanted, but she couldn't sell it, mortgage it, or transfer ownership without my consent. Dad had done this specifically because he worried about what might happen if Mom remarried. He never said it out loud, but I found a letter in his files after he passed that explained his reasoning. He'd seen too many widows lose everything to new husbands who turned out to be financial parasites. Smart man, my father. Smarter than any of us realized at the time. So when Mom married Doug, she moved him into a house that wasn't really hers to give. She had the right to live there, and she could invite whoever she wanted as a guest, but Doug had no legal claim to the property whatsoever. None. The deed was in my name through the trust. The property taxes came to me. The homeowner's insurance was in my name. Did I mention any of this to Doug? No. Did my mom? Apparently not. She probably didn't fully understand the legal arrangement herself, and I wasn't about to explain it to a guy I didn't trust. So Doug moved in, started calling it his house, and nobody corrected him. For years, this arrangement worked fine. I finished college, got a degree in civil engineering, and landed a good job at a firm that designs bridges and infrastructure projects. I moved to the other side of town, got my own apartment, and only visited for holidays and occasional family dinners. Doug and I maintained a tense but civil relationship. He'd make comments about my lifestyle choices, my career, my dating life, whatever he felt like criticizing that day. I'd smile, nod, and leave as soon as politely possible. Mom seemed happy enough, so I kept my mouth shut and my opinions to myself. Let me give you some examples of what living with Doug was like for my mom. The man had rules about everything. The thermostat had to be at exactly 68 degrees year-round because that was the optimal temperature for human productivity. Never mind that my mom ran cold and wore sweaters inside during summer, because the air conditioning made her uncomfortable. The TV was always tuned to his preferred channels, and if mom wanted to watch something else, she had to wait until Doug was out of the house or asleep. Dinner had to be ready at exactly 6:30 p.m. Not 6:25, not 6:35, exactly 6:30, because Doug believed in discipline and routine. He controlled the grocery shopping, the household budget, the social calendar. My mom had to ask permission to invite her own friends over to the house that she legally had the right to live in. And if Doug didn't like those friends, he'd make the visit so uncomfortable that they wouldn't come back. Over the years, mom's social circle shrank to almost nothing. I noticed this happening in slow motion, but felt powerless to do anything about it. Every time I tried to bring it up with mom, she'd defend Doug or change the subject. She'd been with my dad for 23 years in a partnership of equals, and now she was living like a guest in her own home, walking on eggshells around a man who controlled every aspect of daily life. The financial stuff bothered me too. Doug had a pension from his previous job, Social Security, and some savings. Not a fortune, but enough to contribute to household expenses. Did he? Of course not. He considered his money, his, and the house expenses covered by the property situation, whatever that meant. My mom's modest income from part-time work at a local boutique went almost entirely to groceries and household supplies, while Doug's pension funded his hobbies, his truck payments, and his weekend golf outings. I calculated once that over 14 years, Doug had essentially received free housing worth probably $200,000 or more in equivalent rent, not including utilities, property taxes, insurance, and maintenance, all of which came from the trust that my father had set up and funded. Doug was basically living off my dead father's generosity while acting like he was the provider. Then Doug retired 3 years ago, and everything got worse. With nothing to do all day, Doug became insufferable. He started watching cable news 12 hours a day, joined various online groups for concerned citizens, and developed increasingly extreme opinions about pretty much everything. Politics, social issues, economics, you name it. He became one of those guys who could turn any conversation into a rant about whatever was making him angry that day. Family dinners became minefields. I learned to never mention current events, never discuss anything remotely political, never express any opinion that might contradict whatever Doug had absorbed from his echo chamber that week. Even neutral topics could somehow spiral into arguments. I once mentioned that I was excited about a new high-speed rail project my firm might be involved with, and Doug spent 45 minutes explaining why public transportation was some kind of conspiracy. I just wanted to talk about engineering. The man made it exhausting. My mom started looking tired. She'd try to change subjects, smooth over arguments, keep the peace. I noticed she'd stopped expressing her own opinions about anything. She'd just nod along with whatever Doug said, then give me apologetic looks when he wasn't watching. I asked her once if she was okay. Really okay. She said Doug was just passionate, and she'd learned to let things go. That broke my heart a little, but what could I do? She was an adult making her own choices. Then came the BBQ. It was 4th of July weekend, and Mom had organized what she called a family reunion barbecue. Extended family, neighbors, some of Mom's friends from her book club, maybe 30 people total, all gathered in the backyard of the house that, again, legally belongs to me. Doug was in his element. He'd set himself up at the grill like he was commanding a military operation, loudly announcing his opinions on the proper way to cook various meats while dismissing anyone else's input. He was 3 sodas deep and feeling chatty, which was never a good combination. I was sitting at one of the folding tables with my cousin Brian and his wife, trying to have a normal conversation about Brian's new job. Doug wandered over, spatula in hand, and inserted himself into our discussion. "You know what the problem is with this country?" he announced, as if anyone had asked. We all exchanged those resigned looks that family members share when they know what's coming. Doug launched into a tirade about various political issues. I won't bore you with the details because honestly, the specific politics don't matter. What matters is that he was loudly expressing some pretty extreme views in front of 30 guests, many of whom clearly disagreed based on their uncomfortable expressions. I watched my aunt shift uncomfortably in her lawn chair. My cousin Brian's wife suddenly became very interested in her potato salad. Mrs. Patterson from 3 doors down, who'd known my father for 20 years, was staring at the ground like she wished it would swallow her whole. Doug didn't notice any of this. He never did. The man had the self-awareness of a brick wall. I tried to stay quiet. I really did. But then Doug said something that was just factually wrong, not a matter of opinion, but an actual misstatement of basic facts about how certain government programs work. As a civil engineer who works on infrastructure projects, I happen to know quite a bit about how government funding and oversight actually functions, so I politely corrected him. Actually, Doug, that's not quite how it works. The funding mechanism is structured differently. I can explain if you're interested. I said it calmly, respectfully even. I wasn't trying to embarrass him or start a fight. I just wanted to correct a factual error that he was loudly broadcasting to everyone at the party. Doug's face went red. He doesn't like being corrected. Never has. Oh, here we go, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The college boy thinks he knows more than everyone else. Typical. I'm not saying I know more than everyone. I'm just saying that the specific thing you described isn't how the process actually works. I deal with this stuff professionally. You deal with building bridges. You don't know anything about the real issue. Infrastructure funding is literally my job, Doug. He puffed up like a territorial bird. Some of the guests were watching now, and I could see a few of them trying to pretend they weren't listening. You know what your problem is? Doug said, pointing at me with his spatula. You think because you went to college and got some fancy degree that you're better than hardworking Americans who actually built this country, I sighed. I never said anything like that. I'm just telling you that what you said about the funding structure was incorrect. No, you're disrespecting me. In my own home. In front of everyone. And there it was. The phrase that started everything. Your home? I said, keeping my voice level. That's right. My home. My backyard. My rules. And my rule is that nobody disrespects me at my own barbecue. So if you can't show some respect, you can get off my property. I stared at him. My mom had appeared at the edge of the patio, looking panicked. Brian and his wife were frozen in their seats. A few of the neighbors had stopped pretending not to watch. Doug, just to be clear, you're telling me to leave your property because I corrected a factual error? I'm telling you to leave because you don't know your place. This is my house. I'm the man of this family, and I won't be contradicted by some know-it-all kid. I was 32 years old. The kid comment was particularly grating. My mom rushed over. Doug, honey, let's just calm down and enjoy the party. No, Linda. I'm tired of tiptoeing around his feelings. He thinks he can come into my house and tell me I'm wrong. Not happening. Not anymore. Doug, I said slowly, whose name do you think is on the deed to this house? He laughed. Actually laughed in my face. What? Mine and Linda's, obviously. We've lived here for 14 years. Have you ever actually seen the deed? He sputtered. I don't need to see some piece of paper. I live here. I've lived here for over a decade. This is my home. Actually, the property is held in a trust established by my father. The deed is in my name. Has been since Dad died. You don't own this house, Doug. You don't even rent it. You live here because I allow it. Rent-free, I might add. You haven't contributed a single dollar toward the mortgage, the property taxes, or the homeowner's insurance because there is no mortgage, and I pay the taxes and insurance. Doug's face went through several colors. Red, then pale, then red again. That's ridiculous. Linda, tell him that's ridiculous. My mom looked like she wanted the ground to swallow her whole. Doug, she said quietly. He's right. The house was in David's trust. It passed to Jason when David died. I have the right to live here, but I don't own it. You never told me that. I didn't think it mattered. We live here. We take care of it. I didn't think. You didn't think? Doug's voice was rising. You let me believe this was our house for 14 years? It is our home. It's just not technically. Doug turned back to me, his face now settled on a deep, angry red. So what? You think because of some legal technicality you can just kick us out? That's insane. No court would allow it. We've lived here for 14 years. That establishes residency, rights. He had a point about tenancy rights, actually. Even without a formal lease, long-term residents have certain protection. But those protections didn't give him ownership, and they certainly didn't let him kick me off my property. I'm not talking about kicking you out, I said. I'm pointing out that you're standing in the backyard of a house you don't own, telling the actual owner to leave. The irony is pretty thick, don't you think? This is insane. You're insane. Linda, your son is insane. Doug, please, let's just... No! I want him off my property. Now! He's not welcome here anymore. I stood up from the table. Several guests were openly staring now. Fine, I'll leave. But Doug, you might want to remember this conversation the next time you think about whose house this really is. Because if I'm not welcome in my own home, then maybe we need to have a serious discussion about who actually is welcome. I left, walked right out, got in my car, and drove home. My phone started blowing up before I even got there. Mom calling, texting, apologizing, my aunt calling to ask what happened. Brian texting to say that was intense. I ignored all of it for the rest of the evening. I needed to think. The next morning, I made some decisions. First, I called my attorney. She's a real estate lawyer who had helped me with some property investments, and she confirmed what I already knew. Doug was a tenant at will at best. He had no lease, paid no rent, and had no legal claim to the property beyond the fact that he lived there with someone who had residency rights. I could evict him with 30 days' notice, standard procedure for month-to-month tenancies or guests who have overstayed. What about my mom? I asked. She has lifetime residency rights per the trust. You can't evict her, and honestly, you probably wouldn't want to. But Doug, he's just her guest, and guests can be asked to leave. I spent a week thinking about it. Part of me wanted to cool off and let it blow over, but then I started hearing from family members about what Doug was saying behind my back. According to my cousin Brian, Doug was telling everyone at the BBQ that I was mentally unstable and had threatened him. He was spinning the whole thing to make himself look like the victim. He told my aunt that I'd tried to steal the house from my poor mother and that he was protecting her from my greed. My mom called me 3 days after the BBQ crying. She apologized for Doug's behavior, said he was just stressed, asked if I could please just let it go. She said he'd promised to apologize if I came over for dinner. I went. Against my better judgment, I went. Doug's idea of an apology was something like, "I'm sorry you got upset about what I said. I was just expressing my opinions, and you took it too personally. But I accept your apology for disrespecting me, and we can move on." I literally laughed. "I'm sorry, what? You accept my apology?" "Yeah, for correcting me in front of everyone. That was embarrassing." "Doug, you told me to get off my own property." "Our property. Our home. It's not your property. We established that. The deed is in my name." "Yeah, on paper maybe. But morally, ethically, this is the home I've lived in for 14 years. I've mowed this lawn, fixed the gutters, maintained everything. I've earned the right to call it mine. You've earned nothing. You don't pay rent. You don't pay taxes. You don't pay insurance. You contribute nothing financially to this property. I contribute my labor, my expertise. I'm the man of this house." My mom was sitting there wringing her hands, looking miserable. "Doug," I said, suddenly very calm, "I'm going to ask you one time. Will you apologize sincerely for telling me to leave my own property and acknowledge that you don't own this house?" He crossed his arms. "No, because I have nothing to apologize for. You were the one being disrespectful, and I don't care what some piece of paper says. This is my home, and as far as I'm concerned, you're just the landlord, and a pretty terrible one, demanding apologies from your own family." "Okay," I said. "Okay." I left. The next day, I called my attorney again and told her to prepare the eviction paperwork. 30-day notice to vacate, addressed to Douglas Palmer, delivered properly and legally. My attorney asked if I was sure. I said yes. She asked about my mom. I explained that mom wasn't being evicted, just Doug. Mom could stay as long as she wanted, but Doug had to go. The paperwork was ready in 2 days. Now came the question of delivery. I could have sent it by certified mail. I could have had a process server deliver it. But honestly, after what Doug had said and done, I wanted to see his face. 2 Saturdays after the BBQ, I showed up at the house unannounced. Mom was surprised but happy to see me. Doug was in his recliner watching his usual programming. "Jason, what a nice surprise. Are you staying for dinner?" "Actually, Mom, I brought dessert." I held up the apple pie I'd picked up from the bakery. Mom took it to the kitchen while I sat down in the living room. Doug barely acknowledged me, just grunted and kept watching his show. "How's it going, Doug?" "Fine." "House treating you well?" He finally looked at me, suspicious. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing, just making conversation." "Hey, can you turn that off for a second? I have something for you." He muted the TV, looking annoyed. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the envelope, handed it to him. "What's this?" "Open it." He tore open the envelope and pulled out the papers. I watched his face as he read. The confusion, the disbelief, then the rage. "What is this?" "That's a 30-day notice to vacate. You have until August 15th to find a new place to live. After that date, if you're still here, I'll begin formal eviction proceedings through the court." "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious." My mom came back from the kitchen. "What's going on?" Doug threw the papers at her. "Your son is trying to kick me out. He's evicting me from my own home." Mom read the papers, her face going pale. "Jason, you can't do this. This is our home. It's your home, Mom. You have the right to live here as long as you want. That right is protected in the trust. But Doug doesn't have the same protection. He's not on the deed. He's not in the trust. He doesn't pay rent. Legally, he's just a guest. And after what happened at the BBQ, he's a guest who's worn out his welcome. This is insane." Doug was on his feet now. "You can't just throw me out because you got your feelings hurt." "I'm not throwing you out because my feelings got hurt. I'm removing a tenant who told me I wasn't welcome in my own home. You said I could get off your property, remember? Well, turns out it's not your property, so now you can get off mine. No court will enforce this. We'll fight it. I'll hire a lawyer. Go ahead. Any lawyer will tell you the same thing. You have no lease. You pay no rent. You have no legal claim to this property beyond your marriage to my mother, and spousal rights don't override the terms of my father's trust. You're month to month at best, and I'm giving you notice. Doug turned to my mom. Linda, tell him to stop this. Tell him he can't do this to your husband. My mom was crying now. Jason, please. I know he was wrong, but this is too much. Where will he go? That's his problem to figure out. He's got 30 days. That's more notice than most people get. He can find an apartment, move in with family, whatever he needs to do, but he's not staying here. Doug got in my face. You ungrateful little punk. After everything I've done for this family, after all the years I spent taking care of your mother, keeping this house running, being a father figure to you, this is how you repay me? Father figure? I actually laughed. Doug, you've never been anything close to a father figure. You've been a house guest who criticized everything I did, mooched off my father's house, and spent the last 15 years acting like you owned a property you never contributed to. My father built this. My father paid for it. My father made sure it would be protected. You just showed up after he died and moved in. I married your mother. That means something. It means you married my mother. It doesn't mean you own her house. It doesn't mean you get to tell the property owner to leave. And it doesn't mean I have to tolerate being disrespected in my own home by someone who lives there rent-free. Doug looked like he wanted to hit me. I almost wished he would. It would have made the eviction a lot simpler. Instead, he grabbed the eviction notice off the floor and tore it in half. There. Problem solved. I'm not going anywhere. I smiled. That's your copy. My attorney has the original, filed with the county clerk. Tearing up the paper doesn't change anything. You've been served. I turned to my mom. Mom, I love you. You're welcome to stay here as long as you want. That will never change. But Doug has to go. This is my decision, and it's final. I left. Behind me, I could hear Doug shouting and my mom crying. It wasn't pleasant, but it was necessary. The next few weeks were chaos. Doug initially refused to believe the eviction was real. He consulted a lawyer friend, who apparently told him exactly what my attorney had told me. He had no legal claim to the property, and the eviction was valid. He tried calling me to negotiate, but his idea of negotiation was alternating between threats and guilt trips. You're destroying your mother's life, he said in one voicemail. She'll never forgive you for this. I know people, he said in another. You think you can just push me out? You have no idea who you're messing with. That one made me laugh. What people? His buddies from the golf course? Please. He also started a campaign to turn family members against me. He called my aunt 3 times in 1 week, each time with a different story about how I was mentally unstable and taking advantage of my mother. He told my uncle that I had forged documents to steal the house. He even called my grandmother, who's 86 and doesn't need this kind of stress, to tell her that I was robbing my own mother blind. My grandmother, bless her heart, called me right after and said, Jason, I've known you since you were born, and I've known Doug for 14 years. I believe you. That man has always been too big for his britches. Have I mentioned how much I love my grandmother? The best part was when Doug tried to rally support from the neighbors. He went door to door on the street, telling everyone that I was a cruel, heartless son who was throwing his poor stepfather out on the streets. Most of the neighbors had known my father, had watched me grow up, and weren't buying what Doug was selling. Mrs. Patterson from 3 doors down actually called me to say she'd never liked Doug and was glad someone was finally putting him in his place. He tried getting other family members to intervene. My aunt called me to ask if there was any way to work this out. I explained the situation, and she said she understood, but wished there was another way. My cousin Brian called to say he supported me completely and that Doug had been insufferable at family events for years. The best call came from my Uncle Pete, my dad's brother, who I hadn't talked to in months. Jason, I heard what's going on. I just want you to know your father would be proud of you. Really? This feels like a pretty aggressive move. Your father set up that trust specifically because he didn't want some guy to come along and take advantage of your mother. He predicted this exact scenario. He told me once that if Linda remarried, he wanted to make sure the house stayed in the family. He didn't want her getting pressured into selling, and he didn't want some new husband taking what he'd built. You're doing exactly what David wanted. That conversation meant more to me than I can express. My mom tried multiple times to get me to reconsider. She showed up at my apartment crying. She called me at work. She sent long emails about how Doug was sorry, how he'd change, how I was breaking up their marriage. She even got my aunt to call me on her behalf. My Aunt Karen, who I've always been close to, tried to explain that Doug was from a different generation and didn't mean things the way they sounded. I told Aunt Karen that Doug was from the same generation as my father, and my father never told me to get off my own property or laughed in my face when I pointed out basic facts. Being from a certain generation doesn't excuse being a terrible person. The most frustrating conversation was with my mom's best friend Patricia, who called me one evening to help me see reason. Patricia explained that Doug was really struggling with feeling like he'd lost control of his life, and that maybe I could show some compassion. Patricia, I said, Doug has had 14 years of free housing. He's contributed nothing financially while acting like he owns the place. He told me, the actual owner, to leave my own property, and when I pointed out that I own the house, he laughed and said I wouldn't dare do anything about it. What part of that deserves my compassion? Patricia didn't have an answer for that. I felt bad for her. I really did. But I'd also seen how tired she looked at every family gathering, how she'd stopped expressing opinions, how she walked on eggshells around Doug. Part of me hoped this might actually be good for her in the long run. On day 25, Doug still hadn't moved out. He was calling my bluff, convinced I wouldn't actually go through with a court eviction. He was wrong. On day 31, I filed the formal eviction proceedings. The court date was set for 3 weeks later. That's when Doug finally started to take this seriously. He hired an actual attorney this time, not just a friend who happened to be a lawyer. His attorney sent mine a letter requesting a meeting to discuss a resolution. My attorney advised me to at least hear them out. We met at my attorney's office. Doug, his lawyer, me, and my lawyer. Doug walked in like he owned the place. Same as always. Classic Doug. He was wearing his best golf polo and khakis, like he was showing up for a country club meeting instead of a legal negotiation about his impending homelessness. He didn't look at me, just sat down, crossed his arms, and stared at the wall. His attorney was a younger guy, maybe mid-30s, who looked like he'd drawn the short straw at his firm and gotten stuck with this case. He kept glancing at Doug like he was already regretting his life choices. Doug's attorney laid out their position. Doug had been a tenant for 14 years, had invested labor and resources into maintaining the property, and deserved compensation if he was going to be forced out. Compensation for what exactly? My attorney asked. For the improvements Mr. Palmer has made to the property over the years. The landscaping, the maintenance, the upgrades to various systems. Does Mr. Palmer have receipts for these alleged improvements? He did not. Of course he didn't. Furthermore, his attorney continued, we believe the eviction is being pursued in bad faith as retaliation for a personal disagreement. Mr. Palmer has done nothing to warrant removal from his home. I spoke up. His home? He doesn't own the home. He doesn't pay rent. He doesn't pay property taxes. He told me, the actual owner, to get off his property. When I pointed out that I own the property, he laughed in my face and said I wouldn't dare do anything about it. Well, I dared. Now he can deal with the consequences. Doug's attorney looked uncomfortable. I got the sense he hadn't gotten the full story from his client. My attorney presented her case. The trust documents, the deed in my name, records showing 0 rent payments, 0 property tax contributions from Doug, nothing. She also presented the timeline of events, including signed witness statements from 3 people who were at the BBQ confirming what Doug had said. Doug's attorney asked for a recess to speak with his client. When they came back, the attorney's demeanor had changed. Mr. Palmer is willing to vacate the property within 60 days if Mr. Wallace will agree not to pursue him for any back rent or damages. Wait, his attorney just called me Mr. Wallace? That was awkward since my name is definitely not Wallace. Everyone looked confused for a second before his attorney apologized for the mix-up. Apparently he was working another eviction case and got his clients confused. Real professional. Anyway, I considered the offer. 60 days was longer than I wanted, but it would avoid a potentially messy court battle. 45 days, I countered, and he stays away from family events where I'm present for the next 2 years? Doug started to protest, but his attorney put a hand on his arm. We can agree to 45 days. The family event restriction is unusual, but if it avoids further conflict, Mr. Palmer will comply. We signed the agreement that afternoon. Doug was out of the house 43 days later. He moved into an apartment across town, which I'm told is significantly smaller and significantly less nice than the house he'd been living in rent-free for 14 years. My mom stayed in the house. I told her she could live there as long as she wanted. No strings attached. She cried and thanked me and said she was sorry for everything. Here's the update everyone's been waiting for. It's been 6 months since Doug moved out. My mom is doing better than I expected. The first few weeks were rough, but around week 3 I stopped by the house and found her rearranging furniture. She'd moved Doug's recliner to the garage and replaced it with a reading chair from an estate sale. The TV was off. Music was playing. I hadn't heard music in that house since my father was alive. Over the following weeks, she started reconnecting with friends she'd lost touch with. Her college roommate visited. Her sister flew in from Colorado. The women from her old book club reached out and invited her back. She joined art classes at the community center, something Doug had called a waste of money. She set up a little studio in the spare bedroom. Her first painting was terrible, but she was so proud of it that I framed it and hung it in my apartment. Doug, meanwhile, crashed and burned. From what I hear through the family grapevine, his new apartment flooded 3 weeks after he moved in, burst pipe in the unit above him, destroyed most of his furniture and electronics. Insurance covered some of it, but he'd cheaped out on renter's insurance, so he ate most of the loss. Had to sleep on an air mattress for 2 weeks while he waited for replacement furniture to arrive. Then he got rear-ended at a stoplight. His truck was in the shop for 6 weeks. The other driver's insurance covered it, but Doug had to take Ubers everywhere because he'd let his AAA membership lapse. Spent over $800 on rides in those 6 weeks alone. His apartment complex also hit him with a fine for violating the noise ordinance. Apparently, he'd been watching his cable news programs at maximum volume late at night, and the neighbors complained. The property manager sent him a warning letter, and when he ignored it, they fined him $300. He tried to fight it and lost. My mom filed for divorce about 2 months after he moved out. Doug tried to claim half of everything, including the house. His attorney had to explain again that he had no claim to a property held in trust that predated the marriage. The judge actually laughed during one of the hearings when Doug's lawyer tried to argue he'd invested sweat equity into a home he'd lived in rent-free. The divorce finalized last month. Doug walked away with his personal belongings, his truck, and about $12,000 from their joint savings account. That was it. 14 years of marriage, and he got less than 1 year of rent would have cost him. Best part? Remember his golf buddies he was always bragging about? Turns out they were more interested in using his backyard for summer cookouts than in his actual friendship. Once he moved to the apartment with no yard and no grill, the invitations stopped coming. I heard from my cousin that Doug tried to organize a golf outing last month, and only 2 people showed up. Last month, Doug made one final play. He showed up at my mom's house unannounced, flowers in hand, talking about reconciliation and starting fresh. My mom called me while he was still on the porch. I drove over. Doug was sitting on the front steps looking pathetic when I pulled up. "She doesn't want to talk to you," I said. "This is between me and Linda." "No, this is you trespassing on my property. Again. You want me to call the cops or are you going to leave?" He left the flowers on the porch and drove away. My mom threw them in the trash. 2 weeks later, I got a LinkedIn notification. Doug had viewed my profile. Then I got a friend request on Facebook. Then a text from an unknown number asking if we could grab coffee and clear the air. I blocked everything. My mom is thriving now. She joined a hiking group, started volunteering at an animal shelter, and last week she told me she went on a coffee date with a guy from her art class. Said it was nice to talk to someone who actually listened when she spoke. The house looks different these days. Mom repainted the living room, replaced the old curtains Doug had picked out, put up some of her paintings. It feels like a home again, instead of a bunker. She's hosting Thanksgiving this year, first time in over a decade. She already sent out invitations to family members Doug had driven away over the year. My aunt is coming. My cousin Brian and his wife. Even my grandmother, who's 86 and doesn't travel much anymore, said she wouldn't miss it. Doug wasn't invited, obviously. Last I heard, he's trying to sell his truck to cover some credit card debt he racked up furnishing his apartment. The same truck he used to park in my father's driveway like he owned the place. Funny how things work out. So that's my story, Reddit. Doug told me to get off his property. I reminded him it was my property. He laughed and said I wouldn't dare do anything about it. 6 months later, he's living in a flood-damaged apartment, driving a truck he can't afford, divorced, and trying to sell his prized possession to pay off debt. I dared. Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true.